Greetings, fellow moviegoers, and welcome to Movie Central, the place to talk about movies, TV shows based on movies, toys based on movies, games based on movies, and rides based on movies. I'm your host, Mr. CCS, and these are my pets, George the Gorilla, Kyle the Dolphin, and Frank the Sea Turtle. Look, I've made it increasingly clear in the past 4 years that I'm a fan of franchises. Not everything needs to be a franchise, but I am a sucker for connections between movies. However, the point where I'm genuinely turned off by a franchise is when, if it isn't done right. And an example of a movie that was meant to turn into a large, big budget franchise is what we're going to be talking about today. Before we do, however, let's get some historical context out of the way. Before anything else, it is important that the Universal monster films are very well received by fans and critics alike. I've had my thoughts and feelings on them, but they are undoubtedly films that people love, and they are important in regards to how the modern horror film was created. So Universal knew that for a fact and decided that back in the early 2000s, it was time to bring the monsters back to the big screen. With the success of The Mummy and its sequel, Universal hired Stephen Sommers to helm a new franchise based on the classics, which Sommers himself enjoyed. The idea was for this new franchise to have the style of a spy thriller, mainly James Bond, and the overconfident studio decided to buy the sets of the Transylvanian locations for future projects. Casting-wise, Hugh Jackman was cast as the titular lead, and Richard Roxburgh was cast as the main villain, an adaptation of Dracula. With two relatively well-known actors, you'd figure that this movie would be a success. Well, there were some problems. Universal tried to shove as many characters into this film, including Frankenstein's monster, Jekyll and Hyde, the Wolfman, and even Igor. Now, as far as how I'd handle all of these characters in a big budget franchise, well, we'll get back to that in a little bit. The point is that the overconfident and overstuffed movie failed to make its budget back and was a critical dud that has been mostly forgotten about. However, it's been 20 years, and I unearthed it for this specific review to talk about it, as well as how to properly handle a film franchise with these monsters. So, what is the reason this film was buried? It's time to find out. This is Van Helsing. Famed monster fighter Gabriel Van Helsing, played by Wolverine himself, Hugh Jackman, is dispatched to Transylvania to assist the last of the Valerius bloodline in defeating Count Dracula, played by Richard Roxburgh. Anna Valerius, played by Kate Beckinsale, reveals that Dracula has formed an unholy alliance with Dr. Frankenstein's monster, played by Schuler Hensley, and is hell-bent on exacting a centuries-old curse on her family. Together, Anna and Van Helsing set out to destroy their common enemy, but uncover some unsettling secrets along the way. Oh boy, there are a ton of problems this movie has. The plot, while good on paper, doesn't hold any water whenever presented on screen. It just feels extremely clunky and very convoluted. Now, that isn't the biggest problem the movie has. The most egregious problem was that the film was boring. It's so boring! This should be something so awesome to see. Yet all I remember is how many times I looked at my phone when watching it. That's never a good sign. So yeah, this was a very bad movie, and I hate to be so negative, but there's really nothing else I can say. So while I'm at it, I might as well just talk about what worked and didn't work about the movie to tell you why it's a disaster, and also tell you what they could have done. Okay, let me make this perfectly clear. Van Helsing is not an action hero. Van Helsing is a doctor who hunts monsters down in the name of God, but he is not someone like James Bond or Batman, so him having gadgets reminiscent of our dear Dark Knight was completely ridiculous in the first place. Also, as much as I like Hugh Jackman, I have to admit that the direction they were giving him was completely inconsistent. He constantly switches between a British and an American accent within seconds, and that really took me out of the movie whenever it happened. I wanted to love Hugh as Van Helsing, but I got the opposite effect. I hated him in the movie, and wanted nothing more than to wash that horrible taste out of my mouth until it's finished. Also, his name is Abraham Van Helsing, not Gabriel Van Helsing. I know, they tried to make him connected to the Archangel Gabriel, and that was just so stupid. It's not the only one of these more recent movies to do something like this, but I'll talk about that piece of garbage later. The point I'm trying to make here is that Van Helsing was a bad lead and shouldn't have been this violently mishandled. As far as our female lead goes, Anna as a character was hard to watch. She doesn't have a strong enough motivation to kill Dracula, other than the fact that he's the one poisoning the town. I know there's familial connections, but geez, it was weak. It doesn't help the fact that she's played by a terrible actress in the form of Kate Beckinsale. I have seen her in this, and I never want to see her again. Her character proved to be nothing more than a pointless broad who fails at what she does, and one for Van Helsing to try and move. Yeah, this is awful, and I'd like to move on. Then there's Carl, the pointless comic relief character who sucks at everything and bangs a random Transylvanian woman. David Wenham, what the hell were you thinking, man? You were Faramir, a great character in Lord of the Rings, and you fumble up this badly? It's not his fault, it's mainly the writing of the character. But it's still not a good look that there's a character like this in a monster movie. He's worse than the Superman movie comic reliefs to me, and I absolutely hated a lot of those characters to pieces. Okay, I'm getting upset, so I think I should move on. As far as our monsters go, I feel like there were too many monsters and way too little monsters at the same time. The werewolves were poorly utilized. Igor was just Benny Gabor, but worse. He's played by the same actor, no less. Dracula's brides were just over-the-top goofy and eye candy. And Jekyll and Hyde were painful to watch when on screen. Look at this monstrosity of CGI. The only monsters I liked were Frankenstein's monster, because of the design and his decent motivation, but I'll end there because there's nothing else to say. And Dracula. Yes, he's an over-the-top villain. Yes, his plans make no sense. Yes, he's an inferior casting to Bela Lugosi and Gary Oldman, but god damn it, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have a good time whenever he was on screen. He's just so much fun, and the design works great. Even the Hellbeast design is cool in concept, despite the CGI looking terrible. Yeah, I think he was probably the only character I enjoyed throughout the runtime of the movie, and he makes for a great villain for the tone that was established. Overall, I think the characters were poorly utilized, especially the titular protagonist. You know what else was poorly utilized? The effects. God, these look so unfinished. Mr. Hyde looks like a rejected enemy from a video game, which is like most video games. The brides look really artificial. The mini devil babies look quite disturbing in a bad way. The werewolves look very video game-like, still insulting considering the fact that there have been good werewolves in films before this and in video games, and Dracula's Hellbeast, despite the incredible design depicted in artwork, looks awful and unfinished in the CGI. Universal has made great-looking VFX before this, so why on earth does this movie look so awful? I don't know, maybe it was rushed. That said, it still looks wildly unfinished. It's one of the most distracting parts of the movie. This is on a $160 million budget, and this is the best you guys have to offer? Seriously? As far as the music goes, well, I actually like it. Alan Silvestri never fails in my eyes, and he delivered something really fun and action-packed that I actually liked listening to, regardless of the quality of the movie that was attached to. Now, what about the tone? Now, seeing as this is an action movie, there is a fair amount of action. That said, there is one scene I enjoyed from beginning to end. And that is the opening scene. It beautifully recreates the Frankenstein finale, and it has the black and white tint to it, which makes it reminiscent of the classic films. The rest of the film has just action scenes that constantly get goofier and goofier and goofier. That killed the movie for me, because I'm supposed to be scared here, but I wasn't because of how goofy it was. Before I end this video, I want to properly explain how I do this franchise. Van Helsing is still the main character, but there are several solo movies for the monsters that are adaptations of the original movies that all lead up to a battle in Transylvania against Dracula. Not the whole thing in one movie. I plan to expand on this in the future, but it's worth letting you know now what I have to say about it. Moving on. So, Van Helsing is an incomplete, clumsy, and disgusting looking freak of nature that has ruined a director I was actually growing rather fond of, and the Universal classics as a whole. The music was the only thing I'd call great, and Dracula was a decent enough villain for the tone, but other than that, this movie gets a very low and harsh score of a 1 out of 10. This is a mistake, and I hope to never see it again.
Jeez, that was something. The worst part about this is that I'm going to talk about the failure of the Dark Universe later down the line. And I'm scared to death to see how bad both Dracula Untold and The Mummy from 2017 really are. But until then, I do have a good movie to look forward to next week. I think I'll focus on that instead.
With that said, my name is Mr. CCS, this is Movie Central, and that, my friends, is a wrap.